The day the human arrived on Med Station Vorath 9, nobody was prepared. Not the senior physicians, not the emergency triage crew, not even old Brack, the station's head of biological containment, who had personally witnessed a Zetherian plasma eel burst through a containment pod and still slept soundly every night. No, none of them were ready for what walked, no, limped, no, dragged itself through the airlock doors at 0347 station time. Let me be precise. The human did not simply arrive. The human arrived the way a disaster arrives. Loud, messy, completely indifferent to the trouble it was causing everyone around it. His name, according to the emergency beacon tag clipped to what remained of his suit collar, was Dax Marrow. Human male, species designation Homo sapiens, age 31 years by their planetary calendar, current status according to every medical scanner on the station, critical, recommend immediate termination of distress signal and begin post-mortem protocols. The scanners, it turned out, were wrong. Embarrassingly, catastrophically, professionally, humiliatingly wrong. It started when Venna, our head of incoming triage, received the distress call from the wreckage of a human cargo hauler approximately 40,000 kilometers from the station. The ship, a beat-up long-haul freighter called the Rusted Ambition, had clipped the edge of a debris field while running at half speed with a malfunctioning navigation array. The result was what our damage assessors technically call a complete structural catastrophe, and what the rest of us call a very expensive pile of scrap metal. Venna dispatched a recovery pod immediately. Standard protocol. She expected to pull out a body bag, maybe two. What she got instead was a response from the recovery crew that made her stare at her comm unit for a full 12 seconds in silence. "He is alive," the lead recovery officer, Tren, said over the channel. "He is. Talking, Venna repeated. "Yes," loudly. "He keeps asking if we have something called a cold one. We do not know what that means. We are choosing not to find out." By the time the recovery pod docked at Med Station Vorath 9, the entire emergency medical wing had assembled. Not because protocol required it, because word had spread. Something strange was coming in, something that should not, by the laws of biology, physics, and basic common decency, still be breathing. I was there. I am Sewell, a secondary diagnostics officer, 3rd tier, assigned to Med Station Vorath 9 for the past 6 cycles. I have seen Kethran soldiers come in with half their nervous systems dissolved by acid grenades and survive. I have seen Pulveran heavy builders survive cave-ins that flattened mountains. I thought I had developed, over time, a certain imperviousness to shock. Then the airlock opened. Dax Marrow shuffled in on his own 2 legs, which should have been impossible because according to the preliminary scan Tren sent ahead, his left leg had a compound fracture in at least 3 places. He was holding a section of metal pipe he had apparently torn from the interior of the recovery pod and fashioned into a makeshift walking stick. His suit was shredded from the left shoulder down. There was a significant gash across the right side of his forehead that had already begun to clot on its own, which meant his bizarre mammalian blood-clotting proteins were functioning at speed, under stress, with no medical assistance whatsoever. He looked around the assembled medical staff with the kind of calm, good-natured expression of a man who had just walked into a slightly unfamiliar restaurant. "Hey," he said. "Any chance one of you speaks standard?" Venna stepped forward. She was the only one who had managed to recover her composure, and even she was gripping her data tablet with both hands like it was a flotation device. "I speak standard," she said carefully. "You should not be standing." "Yeah," Dax said, glancing down at his leg with an expression of mild personal disappointment, the way one might look at a shoe that had come untied at an inconvenient moment. "It is pretty messed up, huh? You got somewhere I can sit down? My arms are getting tired from this pipe." What followed was, in the professional estimation of every physician present, one of the strangest medical intake assessments in the 400-year history of Med Station Vorath 9. We got him into a diagnostics bay. We scanned him. We scanned him again because the first results came back with so many alerts that Brack's entire containment board lit up red and 2 junior medics in the hallway thought the station was under biological attack. The results were, to put it mildly, a document of sustained catastrophic violence against a single organism, 3 fractured ribs, 1 cracked, a compound fracture in the left tibia, a partial dislocation of the right shoulder, which he had apparently at some point during the wreck popped back into place himself using the wall of the cargo bay because the bruising pattern was consistent with blunt impact self-correction. There was internal bruising across his upper abdominal cavity, a mild concussion, 14 individual lacerations of varying depth across his body, burns on both forearms from what our analysis determined was contact with a superheated conduit panel. And yet, his blood pressure was elevated but stable. His core temperature was within normal human range. His heart was beating with the steady, irritating confidence of an organ that had absolutely no idea it should be stopping. Venna read the full diagnostics report out loud, slowly, with the careful expression of someone reading a document they are going to have to sign their name to and are not entirely comfortable with. When she finished, she looked at Dax. Dax was sitting on the edge of the diagnostics table, eating something he had produced from a pocket of his destroyed suit. It appeared to be some form of compressed nutrition bar. He was eating it with the leisurely pace of a man at a picnic. "You have 3 fractured ribs," Venna said. "Yeah, those happened when the cargo bay roof dropped," he said, chewing. "Caught the edge of a supply crate on the way down. Hurt for a bit. You want some of this? It is peanut butter flavored. Well, it claims to be. I have my doubts. You have a compound fracture in your left leg." "Oh, I know. That one happened second. I was trying to get to the emergency beacon transmitter and I kind of had to crawl over a section of collapsed hull. It shifted. Bad timing." He paused, reconsidering. "Actually, it could have been worse. If it had shifted 6 inches further, it would have taken the whole leg. You were in the debris field for approximately 4 hours before our recovery pod reached you," Venna said. 4 hours and 20 minutes, Dax corrected pleasantly. "I counted. Well, I counted for the first 2 hours and then I got a little distracted because there was a fuel cell leaking near the rear of the ship and I had to patch it before it vented into the crew compartment." There was a silence in the room. The kind of silence that forms when a group of highly trained professionals simultaneously discovers that everything they thought they understood about the limits of biological durability was wrong. "You," Brack said slowly from the back of the room where he had been standing with his arms folded and an expression of deep personal offense, "patched a fuel cell, while you had 3 fractured ribs and a broken leg." "I used my arms," Dax said, as though this explained everything. "My arms were fine." "Well? The burns were already happening by then, but they were not that bad yet. I have had worse. You want to hear about the time I helped my uncle re-roof a barn in August?" Nobody said yes, nobody said no. We all simply stood there in the particular stunned silence of people who have just been introduced to a thing they have no category for. Venna pulled me aside near the supply station. She was composing herself with tremendous professional discipline. I could tell because her secondary eyelids were fully extended, which is what happens when a member of her species is trying very hard not to visibly panic. "Soul," she said quietly, "I need you to run the pain response assessment again. The first reading must be corrupted." "I ran it 3 times, I told her. "His pain receptors are fully functional. He is simply—" I stopped. I was not sure how to finish that sentence. "Not stopping," Venna finished for me. "Not stopping," I agreed. We sent a communication to the Galactic Medical Authority that night. Standard injury report, mandatory filing. I watched Venna write the summary twice. The first draft she deleted because she felt it sounded like she was joking. The second draft she filed because it was factually accurate and she could not in good conscience write a third one that was any less alarming. Subject arrived ambulatory under own power. Self-administered field treatment to 3 separate injuries during 4-hour wait period in active debris field. Subject remains alert, communicative, and is currently requesting food from the cafeteria wing. Please advise. The response came back 40 minutes later. Please confirm species designation. Vina typed back. Confirmed. Homo sapiens. There was a long pause. Then, we are sending a specialist. Back in the diagnostics bay, Dax Marrow had finished his nutrition bar, made friends with 2 of the junior nurses who had lingered in the doorway out of morbid professional curiosity, and was now explaining to them in considerable detail the rules of a human game called poker, which appeared to involve deliberate deception as a core mechanic. One of the nurses, a young veteran named Olo who had graduated from the medical academy only 8 months prior and had never treated a human patient before, was listening with the wide-eyed attention of someone whose understanding of the universe was being quietly, systematically dismantled. "Wait," Olo said. "So the goal is to make the others believe you have better cards than you actually have? Or worse," Dax said. "Sometimes you want them to think you are losing when you are actually winning. But that is lying. It is strategy," Dax said, with a grin that suggested he was very comfortable with the distinction being blurry. I stood at the doorway watching this. A human with a broken leg, 3 cracked ribs, 14 open lacerations and burns on both arms was sitting in our diagnostics bay, running a card game tutorial for our nursing staff, and looking for all the universe like he was having a perfectly pleasant evening. I filed my own secondary report that night. It was shorter than Venna's. I wrote, "Something is wrong with this one. Or possibly nothing is wrong with him. I genuinely cannot tell which is more frightening." I submitted it. I went to my rest alcove. I did not sleep. The specialist from the Galactic Medical Authority arrived the following morning. Her name was Dr. Ivara Pell, a senior xenobiologist with 30 years of field experience and a reputation for never being surprised by anything. She walked off the shuttle with a straight back, a calm face, and the energy of someone who had seen everything and feared nothing. She was briefed on Dax's condition during the walk from the docking bay to the medical wing. By the time she reached the doorway of the diagnostics bay, her calm face had developed a very small but very telling crack. She looked at Dax, who was now sitting up, apparently having convinced Olo to bring him a proper cafeteria meal, eating what appeared to be a bowl of station-standard protein broth with an expression of polite but unmistakable disappointment. "Needs salt," he said, when he noticed her. "You the specialist they sent." "I am Dr. Ivara Pell," she said. "I specialize in human physiological response under extreme stress conditions." "Oh great," Dax said, brightening. "So you can probably help me figure out if I need a cast or if I can just brace the leg and walk on it." Dr. Ivara Pell stared at him for a moment. Then she turned to me. Then she turned back to him. "You," she said, with the measured tone of a professional recalibrating everything she thought she knew, "should not be conscious." "Yeah," Dax agreed cheerfully. "People keep saying that. You want some broth? It is terrible, but it is warm." Outside in the corridor, I could hear Brack on a call with Station Command, speaking in the low, controlled voice of a person trying not to alarm anyone while being extremely alarmed. And somewhere down the hall, Olo was explaining poker to two more nurses using rules she had learned from the patient who, by every available metric, should not exist. Dr. Ivara Pell had a method. Everyone on the station knew it because she told us about it within the first 10 minutes of her arrival, with the confident precision of someone who has rehearsed this introduction many times. "I observe," she said. "I document. I do not speculate until I have data. Speculation without data is just storytelling." By the end of her first full hour with Dax Marrow, she was speculating. Loudly. In the break room. To anyone who would listen. "His cellular repair rate is not normal," she announced, spreading 3 data tablets across the table like a general laying out battle maps. "It is not even within the upper range of documented human variation. It is operating at a speed that should require either a significant genetic modification or some form of external biological accelerant, neither of which his blood work supports." Venna poured herself a cup of station tea and sat down across from her. "So what is it?" "Stubbornness," Ivara said flatly. Venna blinked. "That is not a medical term." "No," Ivara agreed, "but I have been a xenobiologist for 30 years and I have studied 47 species under extreme physical stress, and I am telling you that what is happening in that room is a human being who has simply decided on some fundamental biological level that he is not done yet, and his body somehow is listening." There was a pause. "That is still not a medical term," Venna said. "Write it up as accelerated homeostatic recovery driven by sustained adrenal and neurological engagement," Ivara told her. "It means the same thing, but it will look better in the report." Back in the diagnostics bay, I had been assigned to monitor Dax directly, which meant I sat in the chair beside his bed with a data recorder and tried to conduct a standard patient interview while he interrogated me about the station's cafeteria hours. "I am asking," he said patiently, "because the broth was genuinely bad. Not bad in a sad way. Bad in a way that suggests nobody involved in making it has ever tasted it. Is there a chef? Can I talk to the chef?" "The nutritional preparation unit is automated," I told him. "That explains it," he said, with the solemn gravity of a man whose worst suspicions had been confirmed. "Okay. I accept my situation. How long am I here for?" "That depends on your recovery rate," I said. "For injuries of your severity, standard projected recovery for a human patient is between 6 and 9 weeks depending on physical therapy compliance and—" "2 weeks," he said. I looked at him. "I beg your pardon?" "2 weeks," he repeated. "Give me 2 weeks and I will be walking out of here. You have a compound fracture in your tibia." "I know. I was there when it happened. The bone requires time to knit, regardless of your pain tolerance or your general willingness to ignore physical damage." Dax tilted his head slightly, in the way I had already started to recognize as his expression for politely disagreeing with something while not yet deciding whether to argue about it. "How much do you know about human bone repair?" "I have the standard xenomedicine curriculum," I said, "plus Dr. Pell's preliminary notes from this morning." "Okay," he said. "So you know that human bones, when they heal, sometimes come back denser than they were before the break." "That is documented, yes. It is a stress response in the calcium deposit process." "Right," he said. "So technically, in about 3 weeks, this leg might actually be tougher than it was before I broke it." I stared at him. You are describing your own serious injury as a potential upgrade. He shrugged the shoulder that was not still recovering from dislocation. Got to find the bright side somewhere. I wrote in my notes, subject demonstrates consistent positive reframing of catastrophic physical events. Unclear if this is a coping mechanism, a personality trait, or something more biologically embedded. Further observation required. I underlined further observation required twice. Then, after a moment, I added a question mark. The real incident, the one that got us all, happened on the third day. Ibarra had ordered a full overnight monitoring sequence, which meant Dax had sensors attached at 12 points across his body and a recording unit running continuous biometric data throughout the night cycle. The expectation was straightforward data collection: heart rate, cellular activity, bone density progression, the standard matrix for a human recovery assessment. What we got instead was a graph that made Ibarra put down her morning recaf halfway through drinking it and simply stare at the wall for 30 seconds. During the night cycle, between approximately 0200 and 0430 station time, Dax's cellular repair activity had spiked to 3 times its daytime rate. Not because of any intervention, not because of the medication we had prescribed, which he had taken exactly as directed, but because he had been sleeping. He heals faster when he is unconscious, Ibarra said, holding the graph out to Brack. Brack looked at it. Is that unusual? For most species, Ibarra said. Yes, cellular repair does accelerate during rest cycles, but not like this. Not at this rate. This is... She searched for a word. She had a doctorate in xenobiology and a shelf of academic publications behind her name, and she was visibly searching for a word. Aggressive, she finished. His body uses unconsciousness as an opportunity to go to work, like it has a repair crew that only comes out when the person in charge stops paying attention. Brack considered this. That is an unsettling way to describe it. I know, Ibarra said. I have been unsettled since I walked off the shuttle. I was there when she went back to tell Dax what his overnight data showed. I was curious to see how he would react. He reacted by looking mildly interested, nodding twice and saying, "Oh yeah, that tracks. My mom always said sleep is when you do your best growing." Ibarra looked at him for a long moment. Your mother said that. She was a nurse, Dax said, back on Earth. She used to say the body knows what it needs, you just have to get out of its way. He paused. She also said that about cooking and parking. She applied it pretty broadly. Your mother, Ibarra said carefully, may have been describing something that your species has not yet formally quantified. Dax blinked. Are you saying my mom was onto something? I am saying, Ibarra replied in the voice of a person choosing their words with surgical precision, that the relationship between human conscious activity and biological repair processes is significantly more interesting than our current literature suggests, and that I intend to write a very long paper about it. Can you mention my mom in it? Dax asked. Ibarra stared at him. I will consider it. It was on day 5 that things took the turn nobody had planned for. Dax had been moved to a standard recovery room by that point because the diagnostics bay was needed for an incoming Pulveran patient with a severe spinal injury, and Dax's vitals had stabilized enough that constant intensive monitoring was no longer strictly necessary. Strictly being the operative word, because Ibarra had made it very clear she wanted status checks every 4 hours regardless. What happened was this. One of the other patients on the recovery ward, a young Vithran cargo worker named Seema, had been admitted 2 days after Dax with a severe allergic reaction to a chemical exposure on the loading dock. Seema was stable but frightened. It was her first time off her home station. She was 19 years old and had the particular look of someone trying very hard to be braver than they felt. I was doing my afternoon rounds when I passed Seema's room and heard a voice. Dax's voice. I stopped. He was not supposed to be out of his room. His leg was in a temporary brace and he had been given a mobility aid, which he had accepted with the energy of someone humoring a suggestion they found unnecessary. And yet there he was, standing in the doorway of Seema's room, leaning on the mobility aid, talking to her. I did not interrupt immediately because what he was saying was this. The first time I got hurt bad, he was saying. I was 17, fell off a roof I was not supposed to be on, doing something I was not supposed to be doing. Broke my arm in 2 places. My dad drove me to the hospital and the whole way there he kept saying, breathe through it, Dax, just breathe through it. And I wanted to tell him that breathing through it was not making the bone any less broken. But here is the thing, it helped. Not the arm still hurt. But somehow having something to do with the pain, even something as stupid as just breathing, made it smaller. Does that make sense? Seema was quiet for a moment. Then she said in a voice that was a little less frightened than it had been, I think so. You are going to be okay, Dax said. I know that is a thing people say when they do not know what else to say, But I have been in this place 5 days and I have watched these people work, and I am telling you from genuine observation that they are good at this. You're specific good at this. You are in the right place. I stood in the corridor and did not move for a moment. Then I wrote in my notes, subject demonstrated spontaneous outreach to distressed neighboring patient. No medical training, no prompting, effective. I stood there a second longer. Then I added, remarkable. On day 8, Ivara ran a full bone density scan on Dax's fractured tibia. She ran it once. Then she calibrated the scanner and ran it again. Then she called Brack and Venna into the room and made them look at the results independently before she said anything because she wanted witnesses. The fracture site was healing at a rate she later described, in writing, as inconsistent with established human recovery models. The bone matrix was not just closing, it was restructuring, densifying. The break line was still visible, but the surrounding tissue was already showing the density progression that typically took humans 3 to 4 weeks to begin. It had been 8 days, 2 weeks, I said quietly, standing behind her. Ivara turned around. What? He told me 2 weeks, I said. On the first day, he told me he would be walking out in 2 weeks. Ivara looked at the scan. She looked at me. She looked at the scan again. I want to say he was guessing, she said. Was he? She did not answer. She pulled up her research notes on her data tablet, the ones she had been compiling since the first morning, the ones that had grown from a standard case file into something that was beginning to look uncomfortably like a paradigm-shifting document. She scrolled through them for a moment. Then she said, very quietly, he knew. I think he always knew, I said. On day 12, Dax Marrow stood up without the mobility aid for the first time since his admission. Alla was in the room when it happened, doing a routine check, and she told me about it afterward with the expression of someone who had personally witnessed something they could not quite classify. He just stood up, she said, put his feet on the floor, pushed himself upright, and stood there, testing it. He put a little weight on the left leg, then a little more. His face did the thing, she said. That particular expression he made when something surprised him in a good way, which was different from his usual expression of being surprised by something in an annoying way, though both involved the same slight raising of one eyebrow. Then he took a step, then another. Allo said she told him to stop. She told him she needed to get Dr. Pell. She told him this was not authorized. He told her not to worry. He told her he knew his own leg. He told her it was fine. Then he walked to the window of his recovery room and looked out at the station's exterior view panel. The sweeping dark of open space with the distant scatter of stars and the slow spin of the debris field his ship had died in, and he stood there for a long moment in silence. Allo, to her credit, did not try to stop him again. She stood behind him and watched. After a while, she said, he turned around and said, I need to call the insurance company about the ship. Is there a communications terminal on this floor? The laugh that came out of Allo in that moment was, by her own admission, completely involuntary and deeply unprofessional. She did not apologize for it. On day 14, exactly as predicted, Dax Marrow was cleared for discharge. The discharge assessment was conducted by Ivara personally. She went through every injury, every metric, every healing progression point by point. She did it slowly, not because she needed to, but because she was still, I think, not entirely willing to accept what the data said until she had spoken every word of it out loud. When she finished, she set down her tablet and looked at him. You are, by every measurable standard, remarkably recovered, she said. Thanks, he said. The broth helped. The broth, she said, was nutritionally adequate but not a contributing factor. I know, he said. I am joking. I know you are joking, she said. I am choosing to respond as though you are serious because it is more comfortable for me right now. He grinned at her. That particular grin, the wide, uncomplicated, absolutely infuriating grin of a person who finds life fundamentally funny regardless of what it does to them. She looked at it for a moment. Then, slowly, as though she was doing something she had not planned and was not entirely sure she approved of, she smiled back. I am going to write a paper about you, she told him. You said you would mention my mom, he reminded her. I said I would consider it, she corrected. I have considered it. She is in the acknowledgements section. He nodded, satisfied. Then he picked up his bag, the bag Allo had packed for him, and adjusted the strap on his shoulder. The shoulder that had been dislocated 14 days ago and was now moving smoothly and without visible effort. I walked him to the airlock. It was not part of my duties. I simply did it. At the door he stopped and turned around. Hey, Sewell, he said. Yes, I said. You took good notes, he said. I could tell. You always had that look when you were writing something down. Like whatever you were writing mattered. I did not have a response prepared for that. I am not sure any response I could have given would have been adequate. Take care of yourself, I said finally. Always do, he said. And then, with the particular ease of someone who had arrived broken and was leaving whole, he walked through the airlock and was gone. I went back to my office. I sat down. I opened my case notes. At the bottom of the final entry, below all the data and the assessments and the clinical observations, I added one last line. It read, "The human came to us dying and left us rethinking everything we knew about what dying means. We called him the patient, but I think looking back he was the lesson." I saved the file. Then I went to find Alo, because she had apparently taught herself the full rules of poker from Dax's tutorial sessions and was now winning money from the cafeteria staff on her break hours, and I felt someone with seniority should probably address that. Though, honestly, I was also a little curious about the game.